The resupply bird came in low over the adder with the light dying behind it, and I stood at the edge of the LZ the way I always did, counting what it brought me. Water. 2 pallets of ammunition I'd begged for over 3 radio calls. Mail nobody would answer. A replacement radio that might or might not work above 8,000 feet. And last down the ramp, dragging a rifle case as long as she was and a ruck that outweighed half my privates, a woman I had not asked for and did not want. I knew before her boots touched the dirt that she was a mistake. Not a cruel thought, just an operational one. Firebase coral sat on a shoulder of rock at the top of a valley that had killed better supplied outfits than mine, and everything that came up the mountain had to earn its weight. A body that couldn't pull the line was a body that ate my water and my rounds and gave me nothing, and it was my job, the whole of my job, to know the difference at a glance. I had commanded men in hard places for 11 years. I had learned to read a person the way you read weather off a ridge, and what I read coming down that ramp was a clerical error in fatigues. She was not large. That was the first thing. My Marines up here were mountain hard, ropey and mean from 4 months of hauling and holding, and she came off the bird looking like something the wind could take. Weathered, yes, sun-cured skin, a scar through one eyebrow, hands that had done work but small, and quiet in a way that read to me then as timid. She didn't call out. She didn't square her shoulders and announce herself the way a green transfer does when they're scared and covering it. She just set the long case down carefully, out of the rotor wash, and waited to be told where to go, and I mistook her stillness for someone who didn't know she was in over her head. Gunnery Sergeant Prout came up beside me, chewing on nothing, watching her the way I was. That the transfer. That's what the manifest says. I looked at the paper the crew chief had shoved at me. It said her name, Corbin, and a rank that had been amended twice, and a billet line that just read attached admin, which up here meant nobody knows why she's here. No unit history worth the ink. A posting order routed through 3 commands, each of which had apparently decided she was someone else's problem. Attached admin. They sent me a filing cabinet. Prout almost smiled. He'd been with me long enough to hear the decision in my voice before I made it out loud. I walked over. I want to be exact about this part, because I've turned it over 1,000 times since, and I owe it that much. She came to attention when she saw me coming, clean and correct, and I let her hold it a beat too long before I told her to stand easy, and I did that on purpose, because I wanted the men nearby to see that whatever came up that mountain answered to me and earned its place or didn't. Sergeant Corbin, I said, reading it off the paper like it might be wrong. You know what this is? I gestured at the wire, the rock, the valley falling away below us into blue shadow. This isn't a base. This is a position. Everybody here has a line. What's yours? Whatever you need it to be, sir, she said. Level. Not soft, not hard. Just flat and certain, and at the time that certainty read to me as the empty confidence of somebody who didn't understand the question. What I need, I said, is people who can carry, dig, shoot, and hold. What I got sent is a paperwork billet with no history I can find and a rifle case bigger than she is. I heard a couple of the Marines behind me shift, the small sounds men make when they're enjoying watching someone get measured. I was aware of them. God help me, I was performing for them. You don't belong here, Sergeant. I don't say that to be hard. I say it because up here, not belonging gets people killed. Somebody down the line made a mistake putting you on that bird. We'll fix it. Next resupply, you're on it going the other way. Until then you stay out of the way and you don't touch anything that matters. She didn't flinch. She didn't argue. She looked at me for a moment with a steadiness that I told myself was thick-headedness, and she said, "Understood, sir." And that was all. She picked up the long case, carefully, always carefully, like it was the only thing on the mountain worth handling gently, and she carried it to the spot Prout pointed her at, a scrape of hardstand near the aid tent where the useless things went, and she sat up there without a word to anyone. I went back to my war. I had a valley that wanted us dead and 41 Marines to keep alive, and I did not think about the sergeant again for most of a day, and that is the part that shames me most, not the words I said, but how easily I stopped thinking about her, how completely I had filed her undersolved. By the next morning, the whole firebase knew the commander had called the new arrival a mistake, because that is how a small unit works. My judgment ran downhill and pooled. Nobody was cruel to her. My Marines weren't like that. But a word from me set the temperature, and the temperature was polite indifference, which is its own kind of cold. Nobody saved her a spot at the fire. Nobody learned her first name. When the water detail formed up, she wasn't called. And when I saw her fall in at the tail of it anyway, hauling cans with the rest, Prout looked at me and I gave a small shake of the head. Don't need her. Don't count on her, and he waved her off. And she stepped out of the line and went back to her scrape by the aid tent. I told myself I was protecting the machine. A position like Coral runs on trust that's been earned in blood, and you don't hand a stranger a piece of the line and hope. That was true. It was also a comfortable place to hide a smaller thing, which was that I had said the words in front of my men, and now the words had to be right, because a commander who's wrong out loud loses something up here that he can't get back with an apology. So I let it stand. I gave her nothing to do and made sure everyone saw I'd given her nothing, and I called it discipline. What she did with the nothing, I only half noticed and only later understood. She kept that scrape by the aid tent immaculate. She dug it deeper than she needed to, a proper firing hollow with the spoil packed low, sighted on the one gap in our northern wire that faced the valley. She was up before the watch changed and out past dark, and when I passed her scrape I'd see her sitting with a small spotting scope and a green notebook, glassing the valley and the far ridge and writing things down, numbers, columns of them, patient as a monk. Once I saw her cleaning the long rifle from the case, and it was not a weapon I recognized. A bolt gun with a heavy barrel and a scope worth more than a truck, and she had it broken down on a cloth and was working each piece like she was diffusing it. I remember thinking, with the easy contempt of a man who's already decided, that she was playing soldier, that she'd brought a fancy rifle up a mountain to feel like she belonged somewhere she didn't. She ever say anything? I asked Prout. No, sir, keeps to herself. Korsman says she reorganized the aid tents litters better than we had 'em. He paused. She's been ranging the valley, whole thing, writing it all down. Ranging it for what? She's on the next bird. Prout shrugged. He didn't have my certainty, I could see that, but he had my rank in front of him, so he let it go the way good NCOs do. And I let my own unease go too, because down in the Sarn Valley, the enemy was tightening around us and I had real problems. Coral was under a slow siege that spring. Not a wave, not an assault, worse than that in a way. A dug-in, patient enemy had taken the high ground across the valley on the ridge my Marines called the Adder, a long spine of rock with 100 hides in it, and from there they owned the valley floor. They had at least 2 heavy machine guns sighted in ground we couldn't reach, and they had a marksman, 1 man, we thought maybe 2, who was very good, who had already put a round through the throat of one of my best corporals on a water run and clipped 2 others since, and who fired from a different hole every time so that we never got a fix. The valley was our only road down and their killing box. Every patrol that went into it went in knowing the Adder was watching. We were bleeding a man at a time, slow, and I could not stop it. And a commander who cannot stop his men from dying in ones is a man with very little left over to spend on a filing error by the aid tent. So I spent none, and she kept her columns of numbers and glassed the Adder and said nothing, and I never once asked her what she was writing down. The thing that broke the pattern started as good news, which is how the worst days always start. A supply convoy was coming up the valley road, 3 trucks and a security element, ammunition and more than that, the mail and the parts and the small human cargo that keeps a besieged position from going hollow inside. It was the first ground resupply we'd gotten in 5 weeks. The birds could bring pallets to the LZ, but they couldn't bring the heavy engineer stores we needed to fix the northern wire, and those had to come by road up through the Sarn, under the Adder's eye. I planned it the way you plan a river crossing under guns. A patrol down from Coral to hold the near end of the valley and cover the trucks over the last exposed stretch. Time to the light. Everyone briefed to the inch. I gave the patrol to Lieutenant Ames and 18 Marines. Good men. Ames was young but steady, and he knew the ground. We went over it 3 times on the sand table. The danger stretch was a 900-meter run where the road ran open beneath the adder before it dropped behind a shoulder of rock and climbed to us. 900 meters in the open under a ridge full of hides. We'd timed it for the hour when the sun came over our shoulder and into their eyes on the ridge, which was the one edge we had. And I still believe, that it was a sound plan. They went out before dawn, down the switchbacks, and set in at the mouth of the valley to wait for the trucks. And while they were moving into position, in the gray before the light came up, the sergeant crossed the firebase and came to me. I was at the fighting position on the north wire with Prout and the radio, watching the valley go from black to gray, and she came up quietly and stood where I could see her and waited to be acknowledged. And when I looked at her, she said, "Sir, there's a new hide on the adder. High, left of the notch in the scree above the old goat track. It wasn't there 4 days ago." She had the green notebook in her hand. "I've got a range to it. Whoever built it can see the whole danger stretch, and they can see it after the sun's up, past the angle where the light was supposed to cover our people. If the marksman's moved up there, the timing plan doesn't hold." I looked at her, and I looked at the adder, which in the gray was just a black wall with a paler notch in it, and I felt the specific irritation of a busy man handed a complication by someone he's already decided is worthless. "You've been up here 2 days, I said. "Yes, sir." "And you've found a hide my Marines who have held this valley for 4 months haven't found." "I've had time to do nothing but look at that ridge, sir. No heat in it, just the flat fact. I range it and I write it down. Something changed. I'm telling you before your patrols in the open under it." Prout was watching me. The radio hissed. Down in the gray, Ames's element was setting into the rocks at the valley mouth, and the trucks were 4 kilometers out and closing, and I had a window measured in minutes to change a plan or let it run. And standing at the elbow of that decision was a woman I had told my whole command was a mistake, holding a green notebook full of numbers, telling me the one thing I did not want to hear. "I want to tell you I weighed it fairly. I didn't. I heard the source before I heard the words. Attached admin, playing soldier, on the next bird. I had built her into someone whose judgment couldn't matter, and now to take her judgment would be to unbuild myself in front of Prout and the net, and some small, ugly part of me chose the plan over the warning because the plan was mine and the warning was hers." "Noted, Sergeant," I said. "We timed this to the light. Lieutenant Ames knows that ridge. Go back to your position." She didn't move for a second. She looked at the adder, and then at me, and there was no anger in her face, which was almost worse, just a kind of settled understanding, the look of someone who has been disbelieved before by men who outranked her and has learned that saying it twice changes nothing. "Understood, sir," she said, and she went. And I turned back to the valley and told myself I'd made a command decision, and I keyed the net to check on Ames, and the sun came up over my shoulder and lit the adder, and for about 11 minutes I thought I'd been right. Then the trucks came into the danger stretch, and the adder opened up, and everything I thought I knew went to pieces in the space of a breath. It came from high and left, from above the old goat track, exactly where she'd told me. The first burst wasn't the machine guns, those I'd braced for, those we had a plan for. It was a single rifle, one deliberate shot, and it took the lead truck's driver, and the truck slewed and stopped dead across the road in the open, and everything behind it stacked up in the killing box with nowhere to go. Then the heavy guns woke up, both of them, raking the stalled column, and Ames's element in the rocks tried to put fire back onto the ridge and couldn't reach the new hide because it was too high and too far, and sighted exactly where the morning light no longer covered it. I heard it happen before I understood it. The net went from calm to chaos in seconds, Ames's voice tight and fast, calling contact, calling the guns, calling a man down at the trucks, then two, then calling that they were pinned, that the fire was coming from above the goat track, high and left, and every word out of his mouth was a word she had said to me in the gray an hour before while I told her to go back to her position. Prout didn't look at me. That was the mercy he gave me and the accusation both. He just started working, calling for the mortars, and I got on the net and tried to fight the fight I'd built, and it wouldn't be fought. The mortars couldn't reach the reverse slope where the machine guns sat. The marksman in the high hide was untouchable. I watched through my glasses as Ames's Marines put burst after burst into the scree, and the rounds went nowhere near, because they were shooting at a shadow, and he was shooting from a hole they couldn't see into. And every 15 or 20 seconds that patient rifle spoke once, and something bad happened down in the valley. A Marine trying to drag the wounded driver clear went down beside him. Another, moving between rocks, got pinned so tight he couldn't lift his head. The truck sat dead in the open. The whole extraction I'd planned to the inch was coming apart on the exact detail I'd been handed and thrown away. I called for air. Air was weathered out. A front had come down over the pass and the birds were grounded, and the tactical operations center 100 miles away told me in a calm voice what I already knew, that I had nothing coming for at least 3 hours, and that by then the math in the valley would be finished one way or another. I stood on the north wire with the net screaming in my ear and my glasses on a ridge I couldn't touch, and I ran out of answers. That is a specific and terrible thing for a commander, to reach the bottom of the bag in front of his men and find it empty. 19 Marines and 3 trucks pinned in a killing box under a hide I'd been warned about, and everything I knew how to do was already failing, and the sun that was supposed to be my ally was climbing into a plain, hard sky that lit the valley floor and left the high hide in shadow. And into that quietly she came again. She'd come up from her scrape at the first shots, of course she had. She'd been ranging that ridge for 2 days waiting for exactly this, and she stood a little apart with the long rifle in her hands, not the notebook now, the rifle, and she waited until I looked at her, and when I did she didn't say "I told you." She didn't say anything about the gray morning at all. She said, "Sir, I can reach that hide from the north scrape. I've got the range, the wind, and the angle. I've had them for 2 days. I need you to let me take it, and I need the net to stop shooting at the scree so I can spot the muzzle." I looked at her. I looked at the rifle, the heavy bolt gun I'd sneered at, and at her face, which was as level as it had been on the LZ when I told her she didn't belong. And every stupid certainty I'd built came down to one question, which was whether I would rather be right about her or get my Marines out of the Sarn. "How far?" I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. 1,410 meters to the high hide, she said, without looking at the notebook because it was already in her. The near machine guns at 960, the far ones at 1120 on the reverse shoulder. I can see its smoke even if I can't see the gun. Crosswinds coming up the valley left to right, 8 to 12, gusting. It'll settle in the next 20 minutes as the sun works on the slope. I've got dope for all 3. I need a spotter on the glass, and I need your Marines to stop wasting rounds on the scree so I can work. Prout was staring at her now, so was I. Nobody had spoken to me with that kind of exact, unhurried authority since I'd come up the mountain, and it was coming from the filing error by the aid tent, and some part of me that was better than the rest of me heard it for what it was. "Do it," I said. "Prout, get her the scrape. Get her a spotter, you go with her. Get on the net and tell Ames, cease fire on the ridge, mark for a friendly shooter, call your targets to us." I looked at her one more time. "What do you need from me?" "Quiet," she said, "and about 90 seconds. And she turned and went to the north scrape at a walk, not a run, a walk, steady, conserving everything. And I understood dimly that the carefulness I'd mistaken for timidity 2 days ago was the same carefulness she gave the rifle, the same carefulness she'd given those columns of numbers, and that it was not weakness at all. It was the discipline of someone for whom haste had a body count. I went with her. I left Prout the net and I went and knelt behind her at the north scrape because I had to see it, because I had earned the right to nothing, and I took the front row seat to my own correction anyway. She settled into the hollow she'd dug the first day, the one I'd walked past and thought playing soldier, and it was a real firing position, deep and stable, the spoil packed low so it threw no shadow, sighted on the exact gap in the wire that framed the high hide on the adder. She'd built it 2 days ago. She'd built it for this, for a shot she had no orders to take, on a ridge no one believed she'd read, and she'd kept it swept and ready while we all decided she was nothing. She got behind the rifle and everything about her changed and nothing about her sped up. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She got slower. She built a position with her body, legs spread, the rifle's bipod set, the buttstock pulled in, her cheek down on the comb, and she breathed, and she talked, low, steady, half to the young Marine on the spotting scope beside her and half to herself. A quiet litany that I realized after a moment was her thinking out loud so the spotter could follow. Near gun first, no. The high hide first, he's the one killing them. Silence the marksman, the guns are just noise. Her hand moved on the scope's turret, small clicks counting. 14-10, winds left to right, call it 10, holding off the left edge of the notch. Cold bore, first round's mine to earn. She was still. The valley cracked and hammered below us. She was still. Spotter, watch the scree above the goat track left of the notch. When he fires again, I want the muzzle, call it. We waited. The rifle in the high hide fired. I saw the wink of it now that I knew where to look, high and left, exactly where, and the young Marine beside her said, "Muzzle, muzzle, left of the notch in the dark rock," his voice cracking, and she said, "Got him," and she did not fire. She waited. The hardest thing I have ever watched a person do. She had the man who was killing my Marines under her glass, and she waited, 3 seconds, 4, her finger off the trigger, letting the wind gust and settle, letting her own heartbeat come down. And I wanted to scream shoot, and I understood in my bones why I must not. And then between one breath and the next the rifle went off against her shoulder. I didn't see the round. You never do. I saw the high hide, and I saw, a full second and a half later, the time it takes a bullet to cross 1,400 meters of mountain air, the enemy rifle tip up and go still and not fire again. She'd worked the bolt before the spotter finished calling the hit, already back on the glass. "Hide's down," the Marine said, disbelieving. "Hide's, he's down, that's a hit, that's." "Near machine gun," she said, already moving her body a few degrees, already on it. 960. He'll traverse when his overwatch goes quiet. Give him a second to show me the barrel. I keyed my own radio then, because Prout needed to know the ridge had just changed hands, and Ames needed to know the rifle that had him pinned was gone. And what came back up the net was the thing that undid me completely. I called it in plain. All stations, Coral 6. Friendly precision fire from my position onto the adder, danger close to no friendlies. The high hide is down. Say again, the marksman is down, adjust. And Ames came back. I could hear the trucks and the guns behind his voice, and he said, "Coral 6, confirm, the high hide stopped. We felt it stop. Who have you got up there? Who's shooting?" And Prout, on the net beside him because I'd left him the radio, answered before I could. Prout, who'd waved her out of the water line on my nod 2 days ago. I heard him key up, and I heard him say, slow, like he was reading something he couldn't quite believe, "Coral 6's got a long gun on the north scrape making 1,400-meter cold bore hits, one shot, one hide. Sergeant Corbin," a pause, "says her call sign's Kestrel." The net went strange. I've been on military radio nets for 11 years, and I have never heard one do what that one did. There was a silence, 2 seconds, 3, dead air across a valley in the middle of a firefight, which never happens, which cannot happen, and then a voice I didn't know. One of Ames's Marines, an older one by the sound, came up over everyone, breaking every net discipline there is, and said, "Kestrel. Say again, is that Coral, is that Kestrel on your hill?" And another voice from somewhere else in the valley, a different Marine, "That's the Sarn. That's the she covered the Sarn withdrawal. 2 years, that's." "Net discipline," I said, out of pure reflex, and nobody obeyed me. And I let it go, because I was beginning too late to understand what I had sent to the aid tent. Beside me she fired again. The near machine gun, 960 meters, stopped hammering mid-burst and did not resume. She worked the bolt. Far guns on the reverse shoulder. I can't see the gun, but I can see the dust it's kicking. 1120. I'm going to put rounds into the crew's only exit off that shoulder and make them choose between the gun and living. She said it the way you'd read a grocery list. And the whole time the net was coming apart above us with a name, her name, the one I'd never asked, the one that had been sitting in my firebase for 2 days answering to filing error. And men who had never met her, men pinned in a killing box, were saying it to each other like a rope thrown down into a well. I knelt behind her and I watched her hold the Sarn Valley alone, and I am going to tell it straight because she earned a straight telling. She fired 11 times in the next 20 minutes. I counted everyone. She did not miss that I could see. She put the high overwatch down first and kept it down. When a second shooter tried to crawl into the same hide 20 minutes later, she was watching the hide and not the valley, because she'd understood that owning that one piece of high ground was owning the whole fight, and she made him regret the last 3 feet of that crawl. She silenced the near machine gun and then denied the crew any chance to get back to it. She couldn't see the far gun on the reverse shoulder, so she did something I would not have thought of. She ranged the lip of rock the crew had to cross to feed it and to flee it, and she put a round into that lip every time the dust told her the gun was live, until the crew made the sane choice and abandoned the gun rather than die crossing 3 feet of open stone for it. She never fired in anger. She never fired in a hurry. Between shots she talked the young spotter through what she was doing in that same low, steady voice, teaching him even now, and I realized she was doing it partly so that if a round took her, the boy would know enough to keep the valley closed. And with the Adder's guns silenced one by one, the thing I could not make happen for 3 weeks happened in 20 minutes. Ames got his Marines up off the valley floor. They got the wounded driver clear and the 2 pinned men out of the rocks, and they got the dead, we did have dead, 2 of them, and I will carry those 2, because they died in the 11 minutes I chose my plan over her warning. And they got the trucks hooked and moving, up the last shoulder and behind the rock and out of the killing box, and every meter of that withdrawal happened under her glass. She covered them the whole way. When a knot of enemy tried to press down off the ridge to catch the column in the open as it pulled back, she broke them from 1,400 meters, 3 shots, and they went to ground and stayed there, and let my Marines go home. She had done this before. That was the thing I understood watching her, the thing the net had been shouting. This wasn't a lucky day or a hidden talent surprising even her. This was a craft she had ground into her bones over years, the ranging, the notebook. The position dug the first day, the patience, the litany, the refusal to hurry, and she'd carried it up my mountain and I'd sent it to sit by the aid tent because it came in a package I'd decided to despise. She covered the Sarn withdrawal. 2 years. Somewhere in her buried record was a valley full of men who were alive because of the exact thing I'd watched her do, and their name for her had traveled by word of mouth the way real things do in an army, faster and truer than any file, so that Marines who'd never met her knew Kestrel the second they heard it, and knew what it meant, and stopped being afraid. The trucks came up the switchbacks a little after 10 with the sun full on the mountain, and the firebase turned out to meet them, and I stood at the top of the road and watched my Marines come home, and I watched what happened when they did, and it rearranged something in me that has stayed rearranged. Ames came up first, filthy, his hands shaking the way they do after, and he found me and reported, and then he looked past me toward the north scrape where she was breaking the long rifle down onto its cloth, careful, always careful, and he said, "Sir, is that her? Is that Kestrel?" And I said yes. And Lieutenant Ames, who I had watched grow 4 months of hard bark up here, walked past his commander without a word of leave and went to her, and stopped a respectful distance off, and waited until she looked up, and said something I couldn't hear, and put out his hand. Then it just happened the way weather happens. The Marines who'd come up out of the valley went to her, Not in a rush, they were too wrung out for a rush, but one at a time and then in a knot, the older ones first, the ones who'd known the name, and then the young ones following because the older ones had. The corporal whose burst had gone into empty scree while the real shooter worked from the high hide. The two men she'd unpinned from the rocks. The driver's crew. They didn't cheer. It wasn't that kind of thing. They came and they stood near her, and some of them shook her hand, and some of them just needed to be close to her for a second. And the old Marine from the net, Sergeant Van, I learned later, who'd been in the Sarn 2 years before, came and stood in front of her and didn't shake her hand at all. He came to attention and he saluted her, out there on the hard stand, a sergeant saluting a sergeant, which is not a thing the book requires, which is a thing a man does when the book doesn't have a big enough word. And she returned it, and I saw the only crack in her composure I saw the whole day. I saw her jaw work once, because she knew what that salute was. It wasn't for rank. It was the Sarn saying thank you 2 years late, through a man who'd carried it up a mountain to give back to her. I had told my entire command this woman was a mistake. I had said it on the LZ where the men could hear, because I'd wanted them to see who decided what belonged up here. And now I stood and watched who my Marines had decided belonged, and it was not my judgment they'd followed. They'd gone around me the way water goes around a stone, and they were right and I was the stone. I did not let it stand as a thing understood in silence, because I had not let my contempt stand in silence either, and a man doesn't get to correct himself only in the privacy where it's cheap. That evening I called the firebase together, those who could stand down from the wire in the flat spot by the aid tent where her scrape was, and I had her stand up front, which she did not want, I could see. But she did it because I asked, and she was, under everything, a Marine who did what her commander asked even when her commander had been a fool. 2 days ago, I said, on that LZ I told this unit that Sergeant Corbin was a mistake, that she didn't belong here, that somebody down the line had erred putting her on that bird and we'd fix it. My Marines were very quiet. Prout was at the back with his arms folded and something in his face I chose to read as permission. I said it in front of you, so I'll unsay it in front of you. I was wrong. Not a little wrong, wrong the whole way through. This morning I was warned about a hide on the adder by the one person on this firebase who'd done the work to find it, and I threw the warning away because I'd already decided what she was worth. 2 Marines died in the minutes it took the valley to prove her right and me wrong, and I'm going to carry that, and you should know I'm carrying it, because you deserve a commander who tells you the true cost of his mistakes and not just the clean version. Nobody moved. I made myself keep going. What she did today, most of you saw or felt. Some of you already knew the name before I did. I didn't ask it. I didn't ask her anything. That was my error, start to finish. So I'm asking now in front of everybody, and I'd be honored if she'd tell us who we've had sitting up here by the aid tent while I called her a filing error. And she looked at me level as ever and then out at the Marines and she said, quiet, Kestrel, Overwatch. I covered the Sarn withdrawal, the long one, 2 years back. A pause. That's all it is. It's not a legend. It's just a lot of days doing one thing carefully. Sergeant Van from the crowd. It's a legend to the men you covered, ma'am. And there was a low sound from the Marines that was agreement, and she took it the way she took the salute, with one small working of the jaw and nothing else, because she had never needed us to say it. She'd known what she was the whole time. She'd known it on the LZ when I told her she didn't belong. That composure I'd read as thick-headedness on the first day. It was just the stillness of someone who did not require my belief to be who she was. I turned to her last and I said the only thing left that was mine to say. Sergeant Corbin, Kestrel, there's no bird taking you off this mountain. You've got a line here as long as I command this position, and it's whatever line you want, and I'll be grateful for every day you hold it. You belong here. I was the one who didn't understand what belonging looked like. And I put out my hand and she took it, and that was the whole apology, because up here the words are cheap and the hand is the thing. She held Coral with us through the rest of that spring. The adder never owned the valley again. She'd walk the wire at dawn with the green notebook and the small scope, ranging, writing her columns, and the enemy learned that the high ground across from firebase Coral had a keeper, and they stopped trying to kill us in ones. My Marines learned her name and then her first name, and then the thousand small human things you learn about someone you'd follow anywhere. And I learned the lesson a commander should never have to be taught by burying two men to get it. That the mountain doesn't care what package a thing comes in, and neither should the man who reads the weather off the ridge. I had looked at her coming down that ramp and seen a mistake. The mistake was mine, and it had a call sign, and by the grace of Marines wiser than their commander, she forgave it, and she stayed, and she belonged, she had always belonged, long after the man who doubted her had learned to be quiet and let her work.